Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Where We Shine a Spotlight on NAPSA Approved Members. Those who are making a real difference in the property sourcing industry, and let's face it, we really need to make a difference this year and years going on. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Jackie Fitzgerald, Director of Homes or Houses. Jackie, it's great to have you here.
Lovely to be here, Tina. Nice to speak to you again.
Now, Jackie, you've been in the property industry like me for a very long time now, but I'd love to know what first inspired you to start Homes or Houses back in 2012?
Wow. It's an interesting story because it's one of those spotting a gap with regards to a service that I could have really benefited from. I was working in the Middle East at the time, had been since 1999. I am very cautious by nature. So my preference, rather than equities, investments, etc., was to invest in property. Because of the distance, it was important that I understood the region. I'm Northeast born and bred, so I understand the area well. So I decided I would buy property in Northeast. That was the one positive thought before all of the challenges of doing so. From a distance, it's very difficult. AML regulations that were in place, and I come from banking background, so I understand the rules. But when I was based in Abu Dhabi and my solicitor was based in Durham, popping into his office with my passport was a challenge. So trying to find a property management company that I could trust, trying to find contractors that I could trust, was also a challenge. What was very difficult and was educational was that the UK property market is very vendor-centric. And when you're talking to estate agents, quite rightly, they're representing their clients who are the sellers of the property. And if you're talking to a new build developer, he's biased towards selling his stock. So to actually get advice that was right for me was quite difficult. There were no advocacy services in the UK at the time that could represent me, represent my understanding, and be a sounding board for me. Is this the right thing to do? So the market's corrected, as we all know, in 2008, 2009. A number of colleagues started to ask me what I was doing with property in the UK. I started helping with guiding them as to how the UK property market worked, what the legal structure was. And then the idea came to me. This market is open to an advocacy type service where someone is acting on behalf of buyers rather than acting on behalf of sellers. I didn't want to be an estate agent. I wanted to provide a service which would not only help investors source properties, but I wanted to provide refurbishment and property management as well, as my commitment to the investment I was recommending they made. And I still say to clients now, we offer property management services to demonstrate to you that we don't want to manage non-performing investments. You know, we have to commit to you that if you buy a property through us, we will manage the property for you, because if there are any problems in the future, then we're accountable. We're here. We're not just leaving. So I then decided that I would form a business, set up Homes or Houses, but I didn't know at the time what I was tapping into. And I sometimes wonder whether I would have done it if I did. But we went from 0 properties in May 2012 to around 565 under management by 2016. And so I filled a gap. I didn't realize how big the gap was, but we successfully managed to build a client base from around the globe. But we always stuck to the brand, which was expatriates and foreign nationals. That's changed recently, but it reflected who we were. So, it was basically a service I was looking for, and I made it do what I would like it to do. And thankfully it worked.
I've only just noticed, Jackie, but you and I are almost colour coordinated with our
We are.
tops.
You got the memo. I noticed as soon as you appeared on the camera this morning.
I just noticed. Wasn't planned, guys, I promise.
Yeah.
So, your current focus is on buy-to-let and supported living, which is a
Yeah,
strategy which is really close to my heart with my healthcare background.
yeah.
And I find that really interesting.
Mhm.
What is it about these strategies that you find so rewarding, both for yourself and for your clients, of course?
Well, buy to let is a standard strategy which has been around since time immemorial, before regulations, etc. So, buying an investment property, it obviously is going to be let to someone. So, we tend to be very plain vanilla as far as our buy to lets are concerned. We don't do rent to rent. We don't do. I don't even know what some of the short phrases mean. I'm still trying to work out what a BRRR is. So there is some sort of adapted strategies, but we are very straight down the line. We're buy to let. We're buy to let simply because we're long term investment as far as we're concerned. The Northeast, in my view, isn't conducive to flips. It isn't conducive to speculators. It doesn't have a high volume of off-plan or new build developments. Um, it doesn't have, because of the fantastic affordability of this region, yes, we could buy a property, refurbish it for you, and aim to produce 20% profit. But that 20% profit might only be £14,000 at 12,250. So in monetary terms, it doesn't necessarily stack up for people who are looking to say, I want to buy this, I want to put 60 in, 60 refurb and come out with a property worth 200,000. No, it's likely to come out being worth 120, so the market doesn't lend itself to some of these peculiar strategies that seem to have evolved. With supported living came about for us um, for two reasons. By the time we got to 800 properties under management, I was acutely aware that the 80-20 rule had come in and 20% of our tenants were taking up around 80% of our time. And every month was like Groundhog Day. It was the same tenants that we might have access issues for getting certification. We might find slippage in rent payments. It was the same names. And in fact, it got to the point where I said, if I don't know your name, there is no problem, because I couldn't possibly know every tenant's name. And that was something that I felt really unable to change. We didn't want to start putting criteria in on who could and who couldn't rent properties, but it was a fact of life that some of the people living in our properties had needs and demands which were over and above our capabilities, our knowledge, or our access. Because usually, in my view, and some people might say this is a naive view, but I prefer to believe this. When a tenant moves into a property and everything is in place for referencing, and they move in and everything runs smoothly, and if it stops running smoothly, it's usually due to an event in their lives. It can be the loss of a job, it can be a bereavement, it can be a divorce, a problem with a neighbour. But there's usually a catalyst situation to change, because people don't want to live in this chaotic way by nature. But it can happen. We had a situation where a tenant of ours, I'll keep it very limited, but a tenant of ours believed we were filming her through the fuses and the spur switches in the property.
Okay.
That is way and above out of my league. I reached out to a government agency to try and get help. They told me I couldn't refer because I was only a property manager. It was nothing to do with me. So I had to ring her back, and so they said, ring her back and tell her you think she's got mental health issues and she needs to get some help. And I said to them, not only can I not do that, because I wouldn't want to do it, I'm not qualified to tell anyone that over the telephone. And this lady, I'm looking for support. I'm looking for help. And they said, no, we don't want to know. I then went to the private sector and I ran a couple of companies, but the one where I got an initial traction, an immediate traction, was a wonderful charity here in the Northeast. And I spoke to a fabulous lady, and she said, okay, give me the details. And I gave her the details, and she said, leave it with me. I'll call you back in an hour. She was able to identify this lady had been transferred from one mental health team to another. The transfer hadn't gone smoothly. She'd fallen down the cracks, the usual story. But what happened was this lady, Helen, pulled her up out of those cracks, got everything settled again, and as far as I was concerned, all was well. Around a month later, Helen called me back and said, one of the biggest problems we have is that people with care and support around them, we struggle to find properties. And we tried to have our own properties. And the truth is, we're running on a void over 20%, a void rate of over 20%, and we're pretty hopeless property managers. Would you like to work with us? And would your investors be interested in buying houses which would then be leased to us? And that was where the story began, and that was in 2018. We now provide services to 10 registered providers here in the Northeast. We have our clients, we ask them to buy on demand. So we work with them when they're going through bid tenders. We have a constant pipeline running for them of properties that we're buying for them. And then we go through a schedule of condition with them and we hand over the leases. But we work very tightly on only 3-year renewable leases because that's generally how long their funding lasts for. But we're just going through a stage of renewing 26 of them, and they're in their third renewal. So we're in year 7. Yeah. So it is consistent. What does it mean to our investors? Our investors feel as though they're giving back. And I would love to say it's always a charitable intention, but it's also relatively passive with regards to there's an obligation to bring the property to Decent Homes Plus at outset with all of the compliance. There is then a relatively passive receipt of rent, and there is a clause within the lease which actually states that the property will be returned in the condition it was handed over, subject to the schedule of condition, subject to normal wear and tear. And that works well for investors. So we do have some who that is their permanent preference now, and they invest in that way. And there are some where, if you want a property in the centre of Newcastle, it's not going to work because we can't uplift people from the suburbs and say we're putting you in this darling, shiny 1-bedroom apartment in the centre of Newcastle and expect them to feel comfortable. We do provide a number of projects which can be from veterans, domestic violence, children leaving foster care, 6 or 7 different young person services. It's very close to my heart. I'm a special guardian for Francesca, my daughter, have been since she was 11 months old. So I have some lived experience of the systems and the processes around people who need support. Having experienced it very closely in my family because she's my niece by birth. So that's something I feel really strongly about, that we can help in this way. And I know how important it is to be behind your own front door to recover from whatever you've experienced. And I admire these charities no end, and I do everything I possibly can to help them, because they're underserved financially, and these people are really committed.
It's a sector that's been incredibly close to my heart since I worked in it many years ago. So my frontline knowledge is now some way behind me.
Yeah.
And I thought what was interesting was that you highlighted the 3-year leases, and I find that interesting for a few reasons.
Mm-hmm.
One, it's consistency of care for the supported living sector, which is really, really essential. Mm-hmm. But 2, that you highlighted that it was only 3 years because of the contracts with the local authorities that they have for providing that provision. Mm-hmm. But also the fact that from a finance perspective, if an investor is looking to get finance on a property, these 10-year leases that are quoted, finance providers don't like them.
Yes.
It isn't stated an awful lot because the finance providers would look really, really bad if you stopped paying your mortgage and they had to kick somebody out that was vulnerable.
They can't exit. Yeah, exactly. They can't repossess. What's interesting is, and this is what I really, and I'm a massive supporter of NAPSA. And for me, the whole agenda is I started from a base moral position. What was the right thing to do? And I didn't come at it from what is the best way to make a massive amount of money. I didn't come at it from a view of let's maximize this, who can we take advantage of, and who can we share this profit with. I came from this is the right thing to do. Um, this is, I didn't approach anyone with a view of there could be a commercial opportunity of doing this. And when I started to get to know the very first charity we were dealing with, I was curious. Where does your funding come from? How do you get your funding? What do you have to go through to get that funding? How long does that funding last? And I built our offering to them based on what their circumstances were. And it's only recently that I see 10-year leases, FRI leases, 25-year leases. But I've seen a charity have to go in and take over where a charity went into liquidation because the leaseholder called them in on the lease and it was 25 years. And I sometimes feel as though I'm standing on an orange box and no one's listening, because I just say, they need housing. Okay. And then people will say, what if they lose the commission at the end of the 3 years? The service, because of the services that we provide support to, they're not political. They're part of life. They're never going to change. The demand is never going to die. And if they lose a commission, then another provider is brought in. The consistent factor is the housing. So, but I just wish people would believe if you look at the fundamentals, then everybody wins. But I agree with you. People come and say to me, oh, I don't want supported living because I can't get finance. You can if the lease is right.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't want supported living because the yield isn't very good and I could get higher rent, but it's consistent and you don't have an arrears risk. So people look at it from very much a money motivated position rather than a long-term strategic decision.
That's it. And I think, I'm going to ask you in a moment to confirm what you believe the differences are. And I know that you will have strong opinions on it, as I do. But a lot of the time in social media and on courses, social housing and supported living and supported housing are drummed down the same avenue, but actually they're completely
Very different
things.
Yeah. They're very, very different things, so these two names get confused. I remember Right to Buy coming in the 80s. I was the first time buyer in the 80s, massively encouraged by Margaret Thatcher and the belief that I could get on my bike and create a life for myself. That makes me sound extraordinarily old, but that's when I bought my first property. And I did buy it on the back of what they were saying. And I didn't come from a council house background. I came from a private rented background during my childhood. So I wasn't coming from money, but I could actually see the advantage of allowing people to buy their own homes. I don't think Margaret Thatcher at that point intended that policy to still be in place 45 years later. And as Homes or Houses have recently been appointed as a residential asset manager for a fund, I can't see how any asset manager who owned a portfolio, as the UK government did, would decimate it continuously to the level they have. Because I've seen live examples where you have to give the local authority the right to buy the property back from you if you sell within a certain term, and it varies from authority to authority, but they haven't got the cash to buy it back. And so what we've got now is, these fabulous council house estates, social housing estates that were built after the war with lovely big plots, all of it. How many of them are now privately owned? Probably in the region of 70-75%.
Yeah.
So for me, social housing is housing provided particularly by the government, owned by the government, and where there is no criteria for being an occupant of one of those houses other than there is one available for you, whether you're a single person or a family. Yes. Supported is about the support around the person. And I think the phrases social and supported get pushed together and they don't actually mean the same thing. So when I hear people say, oh, well, my council's the local authority in my area is going to rent the property from me as social housing, so my rent will be guaranteed and I won't have any problems. It's not the same thing. It's not the same thing.
No, it isn't.
And it's caused confusion. And I think It's caused confusion to the point where it's now bordering on being really risky.
Yeah.
That's my concern, is there's so much non-factual information out there. I get calls. I've had a call. Promoting supported living, social housing to me, where if I got involved, I could charge rent at 2.65 times the market rate. And I mean, obviously, once I challenged that, he hung up on me. But it's out there.
It is, sadly, and people get sucked in, and that's the really sad thing, isn't it,
It
Jack?
is. It is a sad
Investors
thing.
who don't know actually get sucked into these things.
There are massively, I'm not saying everybody should be altruistic and not want to do anything other than just for the right reasons. You don't become a buy-to-let landlord to support or take over the role of the government. You become a buy-to-let landlord usually with a long-term intention for your financial security for your own family and for yourself. But I think it's been a very tough time from 2016 really through to current day with the amount of regulations that landlords have to face. But I think the market needs to be regulated. The market needs to be compliant. So I don't disagree with the principle of it. But if you set out with the intention of complying with decent home standards and making sure your certification is right, your property is safe, and live the way you would want to live, then it's not a hard practice to get used to.
Yeah.
But I think as far as the investor market is concerned at the moment, I just wish there was some way of saying to people, if you're not sure what you're doing, if you're not sure what's right, you're not sure who you can trust, contact NAPSA, as the client did last week, who then came to speak to me. Contact NAPSA. Try, and if you don't want to do that, use someone that's been referred to you, that someone else has been dealing with for a long time. Not someone who's bought a house from someone last week, someone who's actually seen the whole process through. And can look back and say, this is the person I used 2 or 3 years ago, or the person I consistently use. Because I think this qualification of social supported, I think a bit like this sourcing market, it needs a framework.
Yeah.
It needs a strict framework.
Yeah. Agreed.
Yeah.
Let's flip it on its head now. And instead of talking about strategies, let's talk about specific locations, because the Northeast is a huge area,
It is.
but you focus on areas such as Newcastle, Durham, and Sunderland. Is there a reason for that?
No, we focus on the whole of the Northeast. So we focus on anything from North York. We've got very clean boundaries. So we focus all the way down to Cleveland before it tips into North Yorkshire. And we focus all the way up to the Scottish borders. So the border with Scotland. So the furthest north property we have is in Alnwick. And the furthest south is in Redcar. So we cover the whole spectrum. It's interesting you say it's a large region. People used to call me when I first set up Homes and Houses and say, can you buy me a house in Wales? Can you buy me a house in Cornwall? And I used to say, no, I can't. And they would say, okay, why not? And I said, because I would drive past 1,000 opportunities to get to the house that you want, okay, or to get to the investment area that you want. So we've always specialised in the Northeast. Quite a contrarian view, because the Northeast has never really been a capital value increase area, but it's been a strong yield play because of the affordability. So we cover the whole of the Northeast. It's really only in the last 4 or 5 years that the Northeast has started to come into its own. I think a lot of people will have noticed a lot more activity around the Northeast and a lot more interest in the Northeast. And I think I lie that the regeneration, the devolution, that we have a Lord Mayor now, and the acquisition of the football club by the Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund, by the fact that 2 further sovereign wealth funds have entered into the Northeast. The Singaporean Sovereign Wealth Fund, GIC, have bought around 3.5 million square foot of land of retail and industrial. And also the most recent, the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund has formed a partnership with BP, and they are creating what's known as the Carbon Quarter, which is the industrial side of Cleveland. So for a region to have now in the last 4 years to have 4 sovereign wealth funds invested in this area, and we've then seen the inflow of what most investors would call the smart money. So we have Blackstone Asset Management, who are building a £10 billion data AI centre on the coast of Northumberland. We have Nissan, who have committed to another £2 billion worth of revenue for an electric battery factory. The Reuben brothers have been holding property in, which is probably the second richest family in the UK, have been holding property in the centre of Newcastle since 2007. They've now started to build, and HMRC are moving to the centre of Newcastle, and also the Treasury is moving to Darlington. Now, all of this activity that's happening and this regeneration has brought us to the forefront, but I do believe that one of the reasons we've come to the forefront is twofold. One, we're still the most affordable region in the UK, so there's still an opportunity, a relatively low entry point for investors. We're looking very similar to the trajectory of the Northwest with the acquisition of a football club, devolution. We're on the same track. So when you think, someone did say to me, oh, I bought a house in Oldham in 2005 and it only cost me £85,000. Strangely enough, you can still buy a house for £85,000 in the Northeast, but look what's happened with Manchester and Liverpool. And I think that's what the Southern investors are saying. So the fortunate thing is we have been around since before the market was fashionable, before anybody wanted to invest in the Northeast. So we have an extraordinarily deep knowledge of the whole region, and we have a very, very tight network. One interesting comment that was made to me from an investor from down south, he said, why is the Northeast closed? I said, what do you mean by closed? And he said, well, it's just everybody I speak to said, oh, no, it doesn't matter. I don't need you because I've got Joe down the road and I've got Bob down the motorway. And I said, that comes from being a relatively ignored region for a long time and becoming extraordinarily self-sufficient in its own network. And it's going to take a while to break down that relationship, to open it up a little bit more. But I'm very proud to say that when you put your light on the next time at home, remember that Joseph Swan invented the light bulb in Gateshead. And when you're on your next train journey, remind yourself that George Stephenson sent the first steam train out of Darlington. The Northeast has got such a strong industrial heritage and an inspirational heritage in a lot of what we've done, that opportunity, we're now absolutely top in life sciences. We've got all of the pharmaceutical companies here. We have the largest wind farm in Europe, is off the coast. So yeah, it's windy, but
it's so windy there, Jackie.
Yeah,
I know when
exactly. Exactly. But we provide 70% of the power to the UK. What's interesting, and the reason I feel very passionately about telling the story is everybody I speak to has heard of HS2. Yeah? You remember the fuss around HS2? And whether it was going to get to Birmingham and whether it was going to go, and it was in the press and top of the press for over expenditure, etc., probably for about 5 or 6 years. Do you know where the trains for HS2 were built?
Probably in the Northeast.
Yep, they were built by Mitsubishi established a new firm, Hitachi, established a new firm, and all the rolling stock was built in Newton Aycliffe. Did it ever make the Daily Mail? No. So we're a little bit of a secret. We're a little bit of, now I'm trying to take the lid off this quite actively. And everybody's welcome. Everybody's welcome.
That's great. Jackie, for someone who's new to investing in your area, what do you think should be the first step that you would recommend that they take?
Get the right advice is very important. If you're trying to invest from outside of the area, because there's 2 different types, there's people who geographically and regionally understand the Northeast and understand locations. If you're coming from the outside of the area, really do get some advice, because I get people send me a question. I actually got an inquiry the other day, and all the guy said to me in the email was, send me some examples of the opportunities available and the return I can expect. That is so difficult a question to answer because there isn't an answer. The answer is we have every opportunity you could possibly hope for, from, whether it's 2-bedroom terraced houses, whether it's brand new builds, whether it's, $1 million houses, whether it's the Chelsea of Newcastle, or whether it's a typical cottage. Do you want to be in the sea? We can be there in 20 minutes. Do you want to be in the Lake District? We can be there within an hour. So everything you could be looking for is here. What are the returns? That really depends on your position as an investor, really depends on what your tax liabilities are, etc. So it's one of those impossible questions. So I would say you can have every type of property you wish in the Northeast. You can have coastal, you can have, historical, you can be in the middle of Durham, you can be everywhere within the space of an hour. Good road transfers, 5 universities, 2 in the top Russell 10. So if you're looking at student accommodation, we're inundated with students at Newcastle University and Durham University, specialising in medicine in Newcastle and law in Durham. So there's so many options. If you're coming from outside the area, again, I'll go back to talk to NAPSA and find someone who is firstly qualified to explain to you about the area. Secondly, they're compliant and who will take the time to educate you on what's available, because there's too many options, and if you are an experienced investor and you come in and you think, what I want is a 3-bedroomed freehold property and my budget is 150,000, 125,000. That's great. And we've got loads of those available. What kind of tenant do you want? Because there's no point in having a tenant who's a student if the property is 30 miles away from the uni, So we always start with the tenant in mind. What kind of tenant have you got experience of, or would you like to see? Stay away from anything quirky, because if you buy something quirky, then I have to be thinking on the day that you're buying it, because I'm always thinking of your exit strategy. Where's the quirky buyer that I need to find in 5 years' time? All right, because we stick with clients. So start any investment with the exit in mind. Be very, very aware of, you're buying this not as a home, you're buying this as an investment property. You wouldn't buy a share on the stock market if you didn't think there was a market to sell it. It's an asset. Yeah. So don't buy anything which could be a liquid. That might look like a clever move now, might not be a clever move in the future. So I think this is all in the investment advice rather than the physical bricks and mortar. The physical bricks and mortar, all the choice is unended. The reasoning for your investment and how you will profit from it and how you'll exit from it are questions or really are thoughts that clients tend not to have at the outset. How are you going to leave? Because we're all brought up in, especially British investors, bricks and mortar can never fail. It can. If you can't sell it when you need to, it's not a liquid asset. It's illiquid. You can't just trade it on the stock exchange. So what would I tell people to look for? Talk to the right people.
Do you think that one of the unique challenges in the Northeast is the very fact that there is such a diverse opportunity there for the different strategies, and the lack of knowledge of some outside investors looking to invest and just thinking, I just want a really great return, but that diversity of opportunities is what really is a stumbling block for them?
Yeah, I think should I say problem? The issue in the property investment market, particularly in the private investor market, not the institutional, because they have a lot more access to data and information and people in places of influence. In the private investor market, it's very noisy and it tends to have fashionistic promotions. And, I always say, when you look at data can say whatever you want it to say, but based on your opinion, because you can adjust the data to reflect. So I could tell you that the only thing you should do in the Northeast is student accommodation. We've got the best universities in the country. We're oversubscribed. There's a constant demand. If I wanted to market student properties, I could tell you that you should go for highly diversified but multiple properties and buy 10 of them for £1 million and use the tax route. And I think what is confusing is that people read headlines and they read social media, and then they put a particular region into a particular track and don't believe it's outside of that, and so I think it's education is needed. Um, I love people coming to visit. I had a client here from London a couple of weeks ago, and I think I'm a bit of a northeast bore, so I go around the landmarks, and then I go past the central station and I talk about George Stephenson, and then I go up to Jesmond, which is the Chelsea of Newcastle, and then I go into, and say, would you like to see the sea? That's 12 minutes away, and we can go here. And the most challenging clients are sort of aghast. They go, it's absolutely beautiful. And I think if you can visit, do visit, um, and educate yourself a little bit more. But property investment is too serious just to buy off the page.
Yeah, it is.
That's
It is.
the biggest thing. I'm not saying everybody has to visit, but just keep asking questions until your instinct tells you you know enough. Because no question is silly, and no question's too many.
And I think from the investor perspective, you have to know what investment outcome you want in the end.
Yeah.
Because if you don't know that, you've no idea how to set up and
How to set
progress.
it up. So clients will come and say, and I'll say, what is your investment objective? And they'll say, well, I would like really good income, but I'd like capital growth as well, and therefore I'd like a combo. And I say, right, on a combo, you will either have less income than you want, or you will restrict your capital growth. So which one is it that you're willing to sacrifice? So it's coming in at it from an investment. I suppose my investment background really helps me with that, because a combination of capital gain and yield is only going to end you with a diluted version of one or the other or both.
Yeah.
But I don't think clients quite think that through. Are you measuring your investment return on gross rental yield? Should you be measuring it on net? Should you be measuring it on ROI, particularly with the increase in stamp duty? How does your mind function to get you to, because everybody thinks differently. Every single mind is wired differently. There is a point, however, with the right information that everybody has that light bulb. I just don't know where the switch is for your light bulb. So I'll give you as much as you want and keep asking, and then we will get that day where you'll go, now I know this is what I want. And I don't mind how long it takes.
I think that's a really good point. And I think also what a lot of property sourcing agents that are baseline property sourcing agents without your FCA background, without your finance background, actually don't realise that the best thing that they can do for an investor is ask them if they've taken independent wealth advice
Mhm.
to work out actually if property investment is the right thing for them at that moment, at that time.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's a tricky one. I think the sourcing market itself, well, we've talked about this. I think the sourcing market needs a framework, and it needs a framework soon. Um, and I think that's something investors need to be aware about. And this is why I'm very, very pro NAPSA, because you're the first point that can actually qualify exactly what being regulated and what not being regulated means. But I think understanding, I once gave financial advice to my father, and it was the most humbling experience I ever had. But what hit me more than anything else was I couldn't get it wrong, because I couldn't change the fact that he's my dad. That's what I thought. And I thought, I can't just not return your calls. I can't not see you again. I can't just go, I'm not dealing with you because that's gone wrong. And I remember feeling the overwhelming sense of responsibility of making sure I got that right. And that feeling's never left me, because every single person I meet is someone's mother, father, brother, sister, child. And if you remember that you're dealing with people,
Yeah.
you will develop automatically, I believe, a general curiosity in what they want, and the hope to be able to work with them the long time to prove that what you said turned out to be right. And that's how to build it, as far as I'm concerned.
I think that brings us nicely on to the next topic, which
Mhm.
I know, Jackie, you and Homes or Houses are incredibly proud NAPSA approved members.
Mhm. Yeah.
From your perspective, why is it so important for investors to work with professional and fully compliant sourcing agents?
I joined NAPSA, I think, and I bet you tell me I'm wrong here, about 2023
Maybe.
or 2022? I can't remember.
Tony could
But
probably answer that better than I could, to be
I
quite honest.
know, Tony will tell us. And I remember my very first conversation with you, okay? And what I liked about talking to you was your assurity in what you were saying, your reasoning behind doing this, the whole purpose of NAPSA. And coming from a regulated background myself and being in the Wild West of property, where, we were a member of TPO, we were registered for AML, we had those kind of things, which I'd sort of brought with my sense of here's the structure, but also realizing if my TPO membership didn't renew, I don't know what they would do. I don't know I don't know what they would do. Would they write to me? All right. But I like, and I would encourage other people to join NAPSA. I like that security that when my PI was due, Tony was emailing me 2 weeks in advance because I'm a business owner and I'm running a business, and my insurance broker isn't going to tell me that. They might ring me 3 months in advance and say, we're going to rebroke it. And I might go, yeah, whatever. There's something about having NAPSA there, that I like that security of Tony coming through. I like the pride in the annual training that my team do for the ICO, for the AML, to be able to send Tony all of our new certificates before he asks me. All right. So I think the market needs to be regulated. And I think clients want a regulated market. Clients want to be protected. We all want to be protected from ourselves. After I've just explained there, you're protecting me from me. You're protecting me from forgetting that my PI should have renewed yesterday. And I think clients don't disagree with FCA rules. They find them laborious, but they don't disagree with them. They don't disagree with AML, although they find it's a pain in the backside. They just like to generally moan about it. We all moan about what we've got to keep on doing. But I think the whole market needs to be regulated. And I think you used a word earlier when we were talking, and it wasn't a regulator. What was it that you were describing?
I think it was when we were chatting about having or somehow implementing that the trade bodies for the respective sectors became a part of the regulatory sector in their own way.
Yes, yes, and it's an oversight, isn't it? It's an oversight, and it's not just when things go wrong. It's being able to check someone's credentials before you speak to them. And I think, and maybe I've gone off a little bit off track on this, but I think that's what the market needs. If sourcing agents, I've posted on various sites sometimes that I think I was the first sourcing agent, and nobody's ever contested me. All right, and
You were just after me, actually, Jackie.
was
We
I?
were in 2012, so you were hot on the back of my heels, I think,
Was
Jack.
I? There you go. But it was a lonely place then. And I read things and people say now, oh, with pride, I've now been doing this for 5 years. And I think, yeah. And, it's a necessary service.
Yeah, yeah,
Estate agents are recommending what they've got for sale. Why isn't there a purchase agent? And that's all a sourcing agent is, and I just think it should be subject to the same rules and regulations, but it's not at this
yeah.
moment in time.
You
Uh,
know, from your perspective, Jackie, being NAPSA registered, I think you will believe is a mark of trust and quality
yeah,
because of the lengths that we go to, one, to assess you before you're actually approved,
yeah,
and then the monitoring of you, which actually supports you to stay at the forefront of everything.
Yeah.
How do you believe that sort of service actually benefits your clients, and what sets you apart from other sourcing agents? I might plug my ears at this response.
Yeah, I think it, if NAPSA got more recognition, I think it would become a quality stamp for most investors. I think, does it make a difference to our investors? Yes, it does, because we tell them about you. Is it the same as, ICO 5000 or whatever the various numbers are? Yes, it probably is, because nobody pays any attention to those either. But everybody wants the framework around them. They want to feel that there's something they can do. But I think with NAPSA, it's a badge of pride for us. It's really important to me. It's really important that whichever way this market is going, we are going with it. We're not going to get into the murky depths of behind closed doors. But I think as far as our clients are concerned, it is important to them. And I'm fortunate with Homes or Houses. They just expect it of us. They'd probably ask a question if we weren't, rather than ask why we are, because we're everything we should be. So we're ticking boxes. So as far as investors are concerned, I think it should be one of the first questions that anybody asks.
Yeah.
Are you
Yeah.
NAPSA registered?
Yeah, I agree, and I hope that's how it will end up, Jackie.
I hope so.
What's really interesting about what you say is that you're very proud of being able to use the approved NAPSA member logo, which is trademarked.
Mhm.
And if we look at a lot of the other trade bodies that are out there, even if you just restrict that to the property sales sector,
Mhm.
let alone the property investment sector, you can pay and join a myriad of different trade bodies and add their logo to the bottom of your website. Each of them in turn will claim that proves that you are wanting to operate professionally and meet regulations, but actually no checks are done to actually check that is the case.
No.
Other than, as far as I'm aware,
Well,
NAPSA
I've been a member of the TPO since 2014. We've had one tenant raise a complaint against us because the new turf that we laid, we didn't come back to water it, so it died, when she could have actually watered it herself. And the TPO held up that wasn't a complaint, really. So the only interaction I've had with them was about that particular case in 2016. I've never spoken to them since. I pay my subscriptions every year. I carry their logo on my website, and I refer clients I've referred one client to them who had a problem with retrieving rent from another property manager down south, and she never got an answer. So, we need something more solid than that. The sector needs something more solid than that, because if it doesn't develop some teeth, we're not going to get rid of the various scams and mis-selling that's happening.
yeah,
And it's happening, whether we want to admit it or not, whether it only makes the trade press and doesn't make the national press. It's happening.
yeah. And I think we need to get everyone singing, as I say, from the same hymn sheet, or we might as well not bother.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
if different information, different guidance, different advice is being meted out or not responded to from various places,
Mhm.
people are going to go with what they want to hear rather than what they need to know.
Of course they are.
And this is the issue, isn't it,
Of
Jackie?
course they are. Every human being's favorite subject is them. We're all guilty of it, So getting to know clients and getting to understand them is really, really straightforward and simple. You're asking them to talk about their favorite topic, and therefore there's a lot of information you can glean from that. I think the responsibility for what they do sits with the agent, the sourcing agent, the consultant, the advisor that they're sitting with. Because if I believe that what you're aiming to do is wrong for you, I will take two routes. I'll either refuse to deal with you, or I will ask you to indemnify me against your decision and to sign to say it's against my advice. I've had to do that probably around 3 or 4 times in the last 13 years. but nobody's ever signed one. Because when you actually say, okay, I'm absolutely telling you this against my advice, please sign this to indemnify me, usually it's, okay, why? Because of what I've just explained. And I think in a service industry, which the UK is very good with service, customers tend to excuse themselves by blaming the service provider. And unless you turn the mirror and say, I'm actually saying this is your advice to you, it's not mine, which is what I aim to do when I say I'm not dealing with you or I want you to indemnify me. Until we start turning that mirror on investors as well as on sourcing agents and saying, why do you choose to only hear what you want to hear? Why do you choose to trust the spoken word and not ask for the written word? Why do you do this? You know, there is an awful lot of mis-selling through financial services, through property sourcing, through all sorts of different means, but someone is there making that decision. And if the deal looks too good to be true, then guess what? You know, if you don't think it's commercially realistic to pay fees up front, then guess what? So where's the grown-up responsibility? You know, to a certain extent, it's a balance. Educating investors to say, if it doesn't feel right, don't do it. If it looks too good to be true, question it. And if you don't want to pay a fee up front, find a sourcing agent that doesn't charge a fee up front. Easy, you know, easy. But it's not easy, is it? Because there's some real hardcore selling going on.
There
And
is.
there's a fear of missing out and all of the other little nuances that come up. But I think there's equal responsibilities on both sides. I think investors need to take the responsibility of educating themselves as well.
They do.
Yeah.
Now, you and Homes or Houses have been helping investors for over a decade now.
I know.
What do you think has been the key to your success in building, the trusted and respected business that you obviously have, Jackie?
We've spent virtually nothing on marketing. So it's only really, we had a website because we should have a website. I was actually embarrassed of it, because we didn't use it as a marketing tool. Because no matter how big the business has got, I've never moved away from the front, ever. Because we've built our business based on repeat business and referrals. And if I'd measured that at some time, which I wish I had, it's only more recently with the inquiries coming from down south that we're starting to get new clients coming directly. I think we are consistent in what we do. We're not afraid to say no, which I think is a brave step sometimes. If we don't believe what you're asking us for is right for you, then we won't do it. We'll find you an alternative that we think is right, but sometimes we would have lost business through doing that. But I'd rather lose the business than cause a problem. I am happy to admit when we get it wrong. I am happy to admit when we need to put it right. And I think that gives people confidence. I think my life and soul is in this business and doing the right thing for clients. And then that brings my father back into the fray. I want to do it right. I want to please you. I want to provide you with a good service. I want you to come back. I want you to refer me. I want to be, and a lot of clients who started with us in 2013 are friends now. There's not many who I go out for dinner with, but there are a couple who genuinely understand me and my life, my family, my business, and I truly believe I'm a consultant. And someone said recently, and this really, really impacted me. I want to be involved because I want Jackie to eventually get the exit she deserves. And that's just said it all. Said it all. And that's really important to me. And I know people say also, Tina, that I'm very direct, but I've never, consciously let anybody down, and I've never refused. I don't charge for mentorship fees, but I'll answer any question you've got. I've never, ever tried to position myself as a mentor, but if you are out there in the market and you've got a question, call me. My actual mobile's on our website, so I get WhatsApps from all over the place. Something I keep intending to change, but I haven't, and my mobile hasn't changed in 15 years either. So what's the secret to our success? I think consistency, never giving up when it would have been easier to do so. Never letting what's happening in the market impact us, trying staying one step ahead, 2 steps ahead if it's the ICRs, whatever it is. And accepting responsibility when we hit the ball out of the court.
Now, I know you've had some referrals directly through the NAPSA process in whatever way that's happened. How have you found that process, Jackie?
Easy. What's not to love? You know, we get an email. I had a meeting with someone last week who told me his woes and that he'd had a long conversation with you and that he had a lot of respect for you. But to then meet him face to face, which I did, and then we exchanged a lot of information, and I asked him to. I thought it would be better if he walked away and thought about everything we'd said before we committed to anything, before we had another meeting. And 2 days later, he called me, said, "I've sorted all over. Can we arrange the next meeting?" Because the pressure shouldn't be on people to do anything. It should be, our role is to act as a consultant and to just guide them along. But as far as getting referrals from NAPSA, it's easy. It's great.
Now, you work now with both overseas investors and now UK investors,
Mhm.
but how do you adapt your services to meet the unique needs of, the two different groups, Jackie?
Well, there's only one difference between them, and that is there are some cultural differences, which my experience overseas helps with. But the only difference is the time zone. So if I'm talking to someone who's in the UAE, we've got a client in Australia, and it goes without saying we're refurbishing 2 of these properties. He actually has got 5 properties with us, and a couple of them need some work done to them. So he's involved with our refurbishing team. He's selling one of them, so he's involved with our sales team and the property management team. But we know the best time to talk to in Australia is at 9:15 in the morning. So we convene and we make a call to them at 9:15 in the morning. Um, my first call this morning was 6:45 because the guy was in Dubai. I'm not impressing on anyone that you should make yourself available, but it is no more challenging than it needs to be. I could have done that call at 5 o'clock tonight when it was 8 o'clock in his evening. It's actually just understanding what works best. Um, and really getting to know an investor from Saudi Arabia is no different to getting to know an investor from Sussex. In fact, sometimes it's easier. It's it depends. All you want to know, your very first meeting with anyone should be, "Hi, my name's X. Tell me about yourself."
And finally, Jackie, for anyone considering their first property investment in the Northeast, what's the
Mhm.
one piece of advice you give them?
Do your homework. Do your homework on who you're talking to and decide on some key factors. What is your budget? Um, what is your preferred tenant type? And what is your exit strategy? And if you keep those 3 points in mind and ask whoever you're dealing with to identify those for you and whether you're right or wrong in your preferences and what the alternatives are, how do you start? Who's going to occupy? And how do you end to come out at a profit? And any consultant, any sourcing agent should be able to tell you, this is what my advice would be for these 3 points. If you ask someone, who would I sell it to? And you get something vague of, well, I don't know, because I'm not sure if I'll still be around then. Don't use them. Because investment is quite about having strategic advice, whether it's, whether you're producing income, a capital, or a blend of the two, or what your exit strategy is. If someone came to me now and said, "I'd like to buy a house and I only want to hold it for 2 years," I would say the wrong asset to buy is a house. Okay, because it's illiquid. And yeah, I think do your homework is probably the most important thing.
It's been brilliant chatting with you, Jackie, and learning
Thank you.
all about the Northeast and things that I didn't know about the
There
Northeast.
you go.
It's a beautiful area. Antonio, I will come up and visit you as soon as we can.
Absolutely do. Absolutely do.
If anyone would like to get in touch with Jackie and Homes or Houses, the contact details will be at the end of this interview. And of course, so will connections to the NAPSA site if you want to have a look and see what NAPSA actually does. But for now, thank you very much to Jackie, and to everyone, thank you for listening. And we will be back with you with another interview again very soon. Bye for now.